I sat at the corner table of O'Malley's bar on West 42nd Street, nursing my second beer and watching my boss inch closer to Alice. The dark wood interior of the bar felt claustrophobic tonight, not helped by the awkward tension at our table. What had started as a casual Friday happy hour with coworkers had taken an uncomfortable turn when Hammond invited himself along, something he'd never done before. Alice wore her usual professional smile, but I noticed how she kept adjusting her position, creating space between herself and Hammond whenever possible. His round face had grown flushed from too many whiskeys, his expensive suit jacket now hanging on the back of his chair. "You know," Hammond said, his voice carrying over the ambient noise of clinking glasses and murmured conversations, "you really should come by my office on Monday. I think we need to discuss your role on the Parker account." His hand brushed Alice's shoulder as he leaned in closer, his wedding ring catching the light from the overhead fixtures. Alice's smile tightened as she shifted her chair back slightly. "I appreciate the offer," she said, taking a deliberate sip of her wine. Our other co-workers pretended not to notice, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the basketball game playing on the TV mounted above the bar. Mark was texting furiously while Jen stared at her screen without scrolling, clearly not reading anything. Alice caught my eye across the table, a silent plea in her expression. We'd worked together for 3 years now, long enough to develop our own wordless communication. I recognized that look. She wanted an exit strategy. "I need to hit the bathroom," I announced, pushing back my chair. I needed a minute away from Hammond's behavior before I said something I'd regret to the man who signed my paychecks. The narrow hallway leading to the restrooms was dark, lit by a single flickering bulb that cast everything in an amber glow. The men's room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale beer. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the spotted mirror. My dark brown hair was getting gray at the temples, stress from work, stress from home, stress from everything in between. I thought about Sarah and Emma waiting for me at home in Pennsylvania. I'd promised to be back for Emma's soccer game tomorrow morning, which meant I needed to wrap this up and catch the train within the hour. I'd been planning to excuse myself right before Hammond inserted himself into the picture. Through the thin wall separating the men's and women's restrooms, I heard Alice's voice, firm but maintaining that professional edge she always carried. "I need to make a call," she was saying. "Excuse me for a minute, Hammond." Good for her, I thought. Hammond might be our boss, but his behavior crossed lines that no workplace harassment seminar could adequately address. I dried my hands and took a deep breath. I'd give it 10 more minutes, then make my excuses and head for Penn Station. Alice was more than capable of handling herself, but I didn't feel right leaving her alone with Hammond when he was this drunk. When I pushed open the bathroom door, everything had changed. The first thing I registered was the screaming, high-pitched and desperate, cutting through the previously subdued atmosphere of the bar. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing as I stepped back into the hallway. At the entrance, about 30 feet away, a man in a torn business suit was on top of another patron. Blood spurted in rhythmic pulses from where teeth met neck, spattering across the floor in dark droplets. The victim's legs kicked wildly, then went still. People scrambled backward, knocking over chairs and tables. A woman slipped in spilled beer and went down hard. No one stopped to help her up. The attacker raised his head, chunks of flesh hanging from his mouth. Even from this distance, I could see that something was terribly wrong with his eyes, clouded and vacant, like those of a dead fish. His movements were jerky, aggressive, as he pushed himself up from his victim and lurched toward the nearest person. More people, no, not people, not anymore, poured through the front door of O'Malley's. They moved with the same unnatural gait, their clothes torn and bloody. One woman was missing part of her cheek, exposing teeth in a permanent macabre grin. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. This couldn't be happening. This was something from movies, not real life on a Friday evening in Manhattan. A bartender vaulted over the bar with a baseball bat, swinging it at the first attacker. The bat connected with a sickening crack, but the thing barely seemed to notice. It grabbed the bartender's arm and bit down hard, tearing through his sleeve and into the flesh beneath. The scene jolted me into action. Alice, Hammond. They were still unaware, probably in or near the women's restroom. I grabbed a heavy wooden bar stool, the kind with a solid base that weighed at least 20 pounds. My fingers wrapped around it so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Alice!" I shouted, though I knew she couldn't hear me over the chaos. The infected, my brain had somehow already categorized them as such, were spreading through the bar with terrifying speed. They seemed drawn to noise and movement, converging on anyone who screamed or ran. I sprinted back down the hallway, the bar stool clutched in front of me like a shield. Behind me, I heard more shouts and the distinct sound of breaking glass. My heart hammered against my ribs as I ran past the men's room toward the women's. The door to the women's restroom opened, and Hammond emerged first, looking annoyed. Alice followed, her phone in hand, expression confused at the commotion she could now hear from the main bar. "What the hell's going on out there?" Hammond demanded, his words slightly slurred. I didn't have time to explain. Looking back over my shoulder, I saw them coming. 4 infected people flooding into the narrow hallway behind me, arms outstretched, faces contorted in expressions that weren't quite human anymore. "Inside!" I shouted, pointing to the bathroom door. "Get back inside, now!" Alice's eyes widened as she saw what was behind me. She grabbed Hammond's sleeve and pulled him back through the door. I burst in after them, slamming the door shut just as the first infected reached it. I slammed the bathroom door shut behind us and pressed my back against it, using my entire body as a makeshift barricade. The door immediately shuttered as several somethings, crashed into it from the hallway. My hands fumbled for the lock, sliding it into place with a click that felt absurdly inadequate. "What the hell's going on?" Hammond demanded, his words still slurred from too much whiskey. He straightened his rumpled suit jacket, looking more annoyed than afraid. "If this is some kind of office prank..." "It's not a prank," I said, wincing as another impact made the door jump against my shoulders. The wood felt thin, too thin to keep out what was coming. Something's happening out there. People are attacking each other. Alice stood frozen by the sinks, her phone still clutched in her hand, knuckles white. Her professional composure had cracked, replaced by naked shock as she processed what she'd glimpsed in the hallway. "Ryan," she said, her voice barely audible above the growing sounds outside the door. "Those people, their faces." Long, broken nails scraped against the door, creating a sound like sandpaper on wood. The lock rattled as something pulled and pushed at the handle. Hammond stepped toward me, swaying slightly. "Mitchell, I demand you move away from that door and explain yourself properly." His face was flushed, eyes narrowed with the indignation of a man used to being obeyed. "You can't just drag us into the women's restroom and..." I didn't have time for this. My eyes darted around the small bathroom, looking for anything we could use. White tile walls, 3 stalls with flimsy doors, paper towel dispenser, narrow metal trash can, and there, high on the wall near the ceiling, a small window. "The window," I pointed upward. "That's our way out. We need to go now." Alice followed my gaze and nodded, already moving toward it. Hammond crossed his arms. "This is completely unprofessional. I'm not crawling through a bathroom window because you've had too much to drink," and the door bucked against my back with such force that I stumbled forward a step before throwing myself back against it. A hand, gray-skinned with blackened fingernails, punched through the wood about a foot above my head, splinters flying. Hammond's mouth fell open, his smugness evaporating in an instant. "Still think I'm drunk?" I growled. The arm thrashed wildly, trying to enlarge the hole. I pushed harder against the door, knowing it wouldn't hold much longer. Alice had already dragged the trash can beneath the window and was climbing on top of it. The metal container wobbled under her weight. "Hammond!" I shouted. "Help her!" But our boss just stood there, eyes fixed on the grasping hand. This isn't possible," he muttered, backing away until he hit the sinks. "What are they?" The infected, I still couldn't bring myself to use the word my brain wanted to supply, slammed against the door again. The top hinge groaned, starting to pull free from the frame. Alice had managed to get the window open and was trying to pull herself up, her fingers white against the sill. The opening was small, meant for ventilation rather than escape. "Hammond, I need you to boost her up," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Then she can help pull you through. I'll be right behind you." He didn't move. "Hammond, now." Something in my voice must have reached him because he finally lurched forward toward Alice, his movements slow and uncertain. Another violent impact hit the door. The wood cracked and a second hand tore through near the first. I adjusted my position, bracing my foot against the nearest sink for leverage. Hammond reached Alice just as she lost her grip on the window frame and slipped, nearly falling off the trash can. He steadied her with one hand, looking up at the small opening with visible doubt. "I don't think I'll fit through," he started to say. The top hinge gave way with a metallic screech. The door twisted inward at the top, creating a gap just wide enough for an arm to reach around and grab Hammond's suit collar from behind. He didn't even have time to scream before he was yanked backward with shocking strength. His head hit the edge of the door with a dull crack, and then he was pinned against the splintering wood. I lunged to grab him, but froze as teeth, human teeth, sank into the side of his face. Hammond's scream cut through the air as blood sprayed across the white tiles in an arc of red droplets. Alice screamed too, the sound mingling with Hammond's until I couldn't tell them apart. More hands were reaching through now, grabbing at Hammond, pulling him further into the gap as the door continued to give way. His legs kicked frantically, knocking over the trash can. His eyes locked with mine in a moment of pure terror before his face disappeared into the mass of grasping hands and snapping jaws. I backed away from the collapsing door, my shoes slipping in Hammond's blood. "Alice, we have to go now!" I pulled the trash can upright and steadied it beneath the window. "I'll boost you up." She was pressed against the wall, staring at the spreading pool of blood where Hammond had been standing seconds before. I grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the window. "Alice, look at me!" I squeezed her shoulders until her eyes focused on mine. "We're going to die if we stay here. Do you understand?" The bathroom door gave way completely, crashing inward. 3 infected people stumbled through, blood smeared across their mouths and chins. Behind them, I caught a glimpse of what remained of Hammond, barely recognizable as human. I laced my fingers together to make a step for Alice's foot and boosted her toward the window with every ounce of strength I had. Her hands caught the sill, and she pulled herself up with surprising agility, squeezing through the narrow opening. The nearest infected lurched toward me, a man in the tattered remains of a business suit, his eyes cloudy and lifeless. I kicked the trash can at him, buying myself seconds at most. I jumped, fingers scrabbling at the smooth windowsill. The first attempt failed, my hand sliding uselessly against the painted surface. Behind me, the infected closed in, their movements jerky but relentless. "Ryan!" Alice's hand appeared through the window. "Grab on." I jumped again, caught her wrist and pulled myself up enough to get my other hand on the sill. With Alice pulling and me pushing, I squeezed through the window, the frame scraping against my back. Hands grabbed at my legs, but then I was through, falling. The drop was only about 8 feet, but I landed awkwardly on wet pavement, pain shooting up from my ankle. Alice was already on her feet in the narrow alley behind O'Malley's, her stockings torn at the knees. I pushed myself up, testing my weight on the ankle. It hurt, but I could walk. The alley opened onto 42nd Street, and what I saw stopped my breath. Manhattan was descending into chaos. A city bus had crashed into the front of a department store, its windshield shattered. Cars were stopped at odd angles, some with doors hanging open. People ran in every direction, some dragging children or carrying bags. And among them moved the infected, dozens that I could see just on this block alone. They staggered after anyone who ran, catching the slowest. A businessman in a gray suit went down under 3 of them less than 20 feet from us, his briefcase skidding across the sidewalk. The sounds were worse than the sights, car alarms, distant gunshots, and screams. So many screams. "My car," I said, pointing east. "Parking garage on 39th, 3 blocks that way." Alice nodded, her face pale but composed. She'd kicked off her heels at some point, standing barefoot on the filthy pavement. "Ready?" I asked, not sure if either of us would ever be ready for this. She nodded again, taking a deep breath. I grabbed her hand, and we ran. We stayed close to buildings, using parked cars as cover when possible. My ankle protested with each step, but adrenaline dulled the pain. Alice kept pace beside me despite her bare feet, her breathing quick but controlled. At the corner of 41st Street, an overturned yellow taxi blocked most of the intersection. The driver was halfway through the shattered windshield, his legs still inside the cab while 2 infected pulled at his torso. His screams cut off as we passed. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We dodged around a group of tourists huddled together, looking at their phones as if the internet might explain what was happening. I wanted to tell them to run, to hide, but there was no time. Alice's hand squeezed mine as we sprinted the final block. her bare feet barely making a sound on the pavement. The parking garage stood ahead, its entrance oddly normal amid the surrounding chaos. I fumbled with my keys at the parking garage entrance, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them onto the concrete. As I stooped to grab them, Alice pressed herself against the wall beside the entrance, peering back toward the street we'd just sprinted along. "Ryan, hurry," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. The automated gate was stuck halfway open, the metal barrier bent at an unnatural angle. Sparks occasionally shot from the damaged mechanism, creating brief flashes of light in the dim entrance. I abandoned the idea of using the keycard and assessed the gap. "We can squeeze through," I said, gesturing at the opening. "You first." Alice nodded and slipped sideways through the gap, wincing as her bare feet stepped on something sharp. I followed right behind her, sucking in my stomach to fit through the narrow space. The rough edge caught my shirt, tearing the fabric as I pushed through. Just as I cleared the barrier, 3 infected people rounded the corner on the street, moving with that unnatural gait that made my skin crawl. They weren't chasing us, though. Their attention was fixed on a woman pushing a stroller about 50 yards away, her face a mask of terror as she tried to run and maintain control of the stroller at the same time. I wanted to help her. Every instinct screamed that I should do something, but what? I had no weapon, no plan, just the keys in my trembling hand and Alice standing barefoot beside me. "We can't help her," Alice said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. "Not now. Not like this." I knew she was right, but that knowledge did nothing to ease the guilt as we backed deeper into the garage, the woman's distant screams following us inside. The parking garage's second level was eerily normal compared to the chaos outside. Rows of cars sat in their designated spots, waiting for owners who might never return. The overhead lights buzzed with the same monotonous hum as any other day. My Honda Civic was parked in the same spot I'd left it that morning when the world still made sense. "This is me," I said, clicking the unlock button. The familiar beep and flash of headlights felt absurdly mundane. We jumped inside, Alice quickly pulling the passenger door shut as I slid behind the wheel. The interior smelled of the air freshener Sarah had bought me last month, pine and something citrusy. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine sputtered but didn't catch. "Come on," I muttered, trying again. Nothing. Alice glanced nervously through the windows, checking all directions. "Try again." I turned the key a third time, and the engine finally caught, roaring to life with what felt like excessive volume in the concrete structure. I didn't wait for it to warm up, immediately throwing it into reverse and pulling out of the spot. "Put your seatbelt on," I said automatically, then almost laughed at the absurdity of worrying about traffic safety now. Alice clicked her belt anyway, as I accelerated toward the exit ramp, the tires squealing slightly on the smooth concrete floor. Each level down brought us closer to the street, closer to what waited outside. As we spiraled down the final ramp toward the exit, a dark shape stepped into our path. I hit the brakes instinctively, but too late. A man in the tattered remains of a business suit slammed into our windshield with a sickening thud. The glass immediately spiderwebbed from the point of impact, but held together. The man's face pressed against the cracked glass for a moment, eyes cloudy, mouth smeared with blackish blood, before he rolled off the hood as I accelerated again. I felt the bump as the front tires went over something and forced myself not to think about it. "He was already dead," Alice said, more to herself than to me. "Already gone." I nodded without speaking and steered us out onto 41st Street. Manhattan had descended further into chaos in the brief time we'd been inside the garage. Cars sat abandoned at odd angles, some with doors hanging open. The street was littered with personal belongings, a briefcase here, a high-heeled shoe there, a child's backpack lying in the middle of the road. And bodies. So many bodies. Some were clearly dead. Others were the walking kind of dead, staggering around or chasing anything that moved. I swerved around both types, keeping my foot heavy on the gas, both hands gripping the wheel. "Can you check if your phone works?" I asked Alice, not taking my eyes off the road as I narrowly missed an overturned hot dog cart. She pulled out her phone, its screen illuminating her face in the growing dusk. "No signal," she said, then tried dialing anyway. "I'll try 911. I navigated west toward the Lincoln Tunnel. It was our best shot at getting out of Manhattan and across the Hudson River into New Jersey. From there, I could take Route 80 all the way to the Pennsylvania border, and then smaller roads to my house outside Stroudsburg. Sarah and Emma would be waiting. The thought of them sitting at home, unaware of what was happening here, sent a fresh wave of fear through me. 911 is just giving me a busy signal, Alice said, lowering the phone. I've never heard that before. It's supposed to always go through. Try the emergency broadcast channel on the radio, I suggested, gesturing toward the dashboard. As Alice fiddled with the radio, I focused on driving. Each intersection presented new hazards: crashed vehicles, wandering infected, panicked people running in every direction. Police sirens wailed in the distance, accompanied by the occasional pop of gunfire. The radio finally crackled to life as Alice found an emergency broadcast. This is an emergency alert. Multiple incidents of extreme violence have been reported throughout Manhattan. Citizens are advised to remain indoors and avoid contact with aggressive individuals who may be infected with an unknown pathogen. Symptoms include extreme aggression, non-responsiveness, and violent behavior. Do not approach these individuals. Lock all doors and windows. Wait for authorities to... The broadcast cut out, replaced by static, then returned. Spreading to outer boroughs, military assistance has been requested. All bridges and tunnels are experiencing heavy congestion. Stay in your homes if possible. This message will repeat. Alice turned the volume down as the message began to loop. Did you hear that? She asked quietly. It's not just here. It's spreading. I nodded grimly, taking a right turn onto 40th Street to avoid a burning bus blocking the road ahead. I need to get home, I said. My wife Sarah and our daughter Emma are at our house in Pennsylvania, about 2 hours from here when traffic is normal. I gave a humorless laugh. Nothing's normal now. Alice looked at me, her face pale but composed. We'll get there. The streets grew more congested as we approached the Lincoln Tunnel. Soon we hit a solid wall of vehicles, all trying to escape the city at once. Horns blared uselessly. Some people had abandoned their cars altogether, continuing on foot with whatever they could carry. I rolled down my window and leaned out, trying to see ahead. The tunnel entrance was completely gridlocked, cars packed bumper to bumper all the way inside. We're not getting through this way, I said, already putting the car in reverse. We need another option. Alice pointed north. What about the George Washington Bridge? Worth a try. I backed up until I found space to turn around, then headed north on smaller side streets, trying to avoid the main avenues that would be most congested. As we passed an intersection, we saw a police officer standing in the middle of the street, his pistol raised. He fired 3 shots into an approaching crowd of infected, dropping the leaders, but there were too many. We watched in horror as they swarmed him, pulling him down beneath a tangle of grasping hands and snapping teeth. Alice looked away. I kept driving. I've never even fired a gun, she said softly. I have, I replied. My dad taught me when I was younger. Basic hunting rifles mostly. Never thought I'd wish I had one until now. We continued north through the city, the car's headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows between the buildings. The streets became less crowded as we moved away from Midtown, but we still passed scenes of horror every few blocks: overturned ambulances, small groups of infected feeding on victims, people barricading themselves inside stores or apartment buildings. By the time we reached the approach to the George Washington Bridge, the sun was setting over the Hudson, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. The bridge loomed ahead of us, its massive towers silhouetted against the darkening sky. Traffic here was moving, albeit slowly, a stark contrast to the gridlock at the Lincoln Tunnel. Police had set up barricades, checking vehicles before letting them pass onto the bridge. Looks like they're screening people, Alice observed as we joined the line of cars, making sure no one infected gets across. I nodded, some of the tension easing from my shoulders at the sight of organized authority. Maybe the situation wasn't as hopeless as it had seemed. Maybe someone was still in control. We inched forward in the line as the sun dipped below the horizon, the last rays of daylight fading from the sky. The bridge stretched before us, promising escape from the nightmare Manhattan had become. On the far side lay New Jersey, and beyond that, the long road to Pennsylvania, to Sarah and Emma. The police checkpoint at the George Washington Bridge moved with surprising efficiency despite the chaos. Officers in tactical gear checked each vehicle, shining flashlights into windows and asking the same questions. Anyone bitten? Anyone sick? Where are you headed? When our turn came, a young officer with sweat staining his uniform looked at Alice's torn stockings and my bloodied shirt. "You two okay?" he asked, his hand resting near his holster. "We're fine," I said, "just trying to get out of the city." He studied us for a moment, then waved us through. "Keep moving. Don't stop until you're well clear of the metropolitan area." Behind us, Manhattan's skyline burned against the night sky, orange flames licking upward from buildings in at least 3 different neighborhoods. Smoke billowed into the darkness, obscuring the stars. "We made it," Alice said quietly as we crossed into New Jersey, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. I nodded but couldn't find the words to respond. Making it across the bridge didn't feel like victory, just the first hurdle in what promised to be a long, terrible night. Route 80 stretched westward like a ribbon through northern New Jersey. Under normal circumstances, I'd have been home in less than 2 hours. But these weren't normal circumstances. Abandoned cars dotted the highway, forcing me to swerve between lanes. Occasionally, shadowy figures stumbled along the shoulder or between vehicles. I kept my foot heavy on the accelerator, refusing to slow down enough to get a better look. The radio had gone silent after cycling through emergency broadcasts for an hour. The last message had been cut short mid-sentence, something about National Guard deployments to major cities. Then, nothing but static. Alice tried her phone again every 20 minutes, but the networks were either jammed or down completely. My own phone showed no service, the screen becoming nothing more than a clock as the night wore on. "You should try to sleep," I said around midnight, noticing her head nodding forward before she jerked upright. "I'll wake you if anything changes." She hesitated, then reclined her seat slightly. "Wake me in an hour. You'll need to rest too." I promised I would, though I had no intention of closing my eyes while behind the wheel. Not tonight. Alice was asleep within minutes, her breathing becoming deep and regular. Even in sleep, her face remained tense, her brow furrowed. Every time we hit a bump or I had to brake suddenly to avoid debris, she would twitch or mumble something unintelligible before settling again. I drove on, alone with my thoughts and the hum of tires on asphalt. The highway grew darker as we left the more populated areas behind. Fewer streetlights, fewer cars. The darkness between exits stretched longer. My mind kept returning to Sarah and Emma. Were they safe? Had they heard the news? Had the infection reached Pennsylvania already? I calculated the time difference between Manhattan and Stroudsburg, just about 2 hours under normal conditions. But how fast was this thing spreading? The emergency broadcast had mentioned the outer boroughs. That meant Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx were already affected when we left. How much farther in these few hours? My knuckles turned white as I gripped the steering wheel harder, pushing the car faster. Around 2 in the morning, the first warning sign appeared. The temperature gauge on the dashboard crept upward, moving from its normal position into the red zone. I tapped it, hoping it was just a sensor malfunction. It wasn't. Minutes later, white steam began billowing from under the hood, illuminated in the headlights like ghostly breath in winter air. The engine made a concerning knocking sound. No, I muttered, easing my foot off the gas. The car coasted forward, losing speed. Alice stirred beside me. "What's happening?" she asked, voice thick with sleep. "Car's overheating. I need to pull over." I guided the Honda onto the shoulder near an exit sign for Parsippany, the steering becoming increasingly difficult as the power assist failed. The car rolled to a stop, steam now pouring from every seam in the hood. I turned the key, and the engine died with a shudder. We sat in silence for a moment. "Can you fix it?" Alice asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. I got out and lifted the hood, jumping back as a cloud of steam rushed out. When it cleared enough to see, even my limited mechanical knowledge told me what I needed to know. Coolant was spraying from a cracked radiator, and oil pooled beneath the engine. The head gasket had likely blown. "It's dead," I said when I got back in the car. "Completely dead." Alice looked out the window at the dark highway stretching in both directions. No lights except our own hazard blinkers reflecting off the guardrail. "What now?" I checked the time. 2:17 a.m. We walk. There should be a service station or rest stop ahead. I didn't add that there might also be infected ahead. We both knew that already. We gathered what little we had: my jacket, Alice's purse, a half-empty bottle of water, and a granola bar from the glove compartment. Before leaving the car, I popped the trunk and found a tire iron. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. The night air felt cool against my face as we started walking west along the shoulder of Route 80. The moon provided just enough light to see a few feet ahead. Every sound made us flinch: the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of an animal, the creaking of road signs in the breeze. "I should have gotten gas in Manhattan," I said after we'd walked about 20 minutes in silence. "Something probably got into the coolant system when we hit that person." I couldn't bring myself to say infected or whatever other word might apply. "You couldn't have known," Alice replied, her bare feet making almost no sound on the asphalt. Earlier, I'd offered her my socks to protect her feet, but she'd declined, saying she was used to walking barefoot as a kid. We passed an abandoned SUV, its doors hanging open. A child's car seat was visible in the back, empty. Neither of us commented on it. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a black river cutting through darker countryside. No streetlights here, just the occasional reflective marker. No cars passed us going either direction. The world felt emptier with each step. Then we heard it, the distant rumble of an engine behind us. We both turned at the same moment, squinting into the darkness. Headlights appeared around a bend, growing brighter as they approached. "Hey!" I shouted, waving my arms over my head. "Hey, stop!" Alice joined me, jumping and waving to make ourselves visible. The headlights drew closer, illuminating us clearly on the roadside. For a moment, hope surged through me as the vehicle, a pickup truck, slowed slightly. Then the engine roared, and it accelerated past us, its taillights receding into the night. "Damn it!" I kicked at the gravel on the shoulder. We stood there, watching the taillights get smaller, when suddenly they flared brighter. The truck had braked. Then the reverse lights came on, and it began backing up toward us. "Should we run?" Alice whispered, her body tensing beside me. I gripped the tire iron tighter. "No, but stay behind me." The truck reversed until it was about 20 feet away, then stopped. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then the driver's side window rolled down. The beam of a flashlight hit my face, temporarily blinding me. As my eyes adjusted, I made out the shape of a rifle barrel pointing directly at us from the truck's window. "Don't move," a deep voice commanded. "Either of you bit?" "No," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're not infected." Our car broke down about a mile back. The flashlight beam moved from my face to Alice standing behind me, then back to me. It lowered to examine our clothes, our hands, our posture. "You're shaking," the voice observed. "It's been a rough night," I answered truthfully. The man in the truck studied us for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Then the rifle barrel dipped downward and the flashlight clicked off. "Name's David Turner," he said, his voice losing some of its edge. "Was heading back from Newark. Went to check on my brother when the news first hit. Place was already a mess by the time I got there." In the dim light from the truck's interior, I could make out a thick beard and the glint of eyes beneath a baseball cap. His hands never left the rifle, though it was no longer pointed directly at us. "Ryan Mitchell," I said, "and this is Alice Coleman. We just got out of Manhattan." "Manhattan?" His voice took on a note of surprise. "Heard on the radio it was completely overrun?" "Nearly," I confirmed. "We crossed the GW Bridge right as they were starting to screen people. Police presence was heavy, but things were deteriorating fast." David seemed to make a decision. He leaned across the seat and pushed open the passenger door. "Get in, both of you. Not safe out here after dark." Alice glanced at me questioningly. I nodded slightly. We didn't have many options. "Where are you headed?" David asked as we approached the truck. "Pennsylvania. My family's there." I helped Alice up into the high cab before climbing in myself. The truck's interior smelled of coffee and gun oil. "Don't think you'll make it tonight," David said matter-of-factly. "Roads west of here are worse than what you've seen. Military's trying to set up checkpoints, causing 10-mile backups. And those things are everywhere." He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. "My place is about 15 miles north. You're welcome to crash there until morning. Figure out your next move then." "Thank you," Alice said, the first words she'd spoken since the truck appeared. David nodded once, then reached for the gear shift. Before he could put the truck in drive, movement caught my eye. From the tree line about 30 yards away, dark figures emerged, stumbling onto the highway. "David," I said quietly. "I see them," he replied, his voice calm. He reached across us to the glove compartment and removed a handgun, which he placed in his lap. Then, with practiced motions, he raised the rifle and rested it on the door frame. 5 infected people moved toward the truck, drawn by its headlights. In the harsh beams, I could see their injuries clearly. One missing an arm, another with its throat torn open, all covered in dark stains. David took a deep breath, held it, then exhaled slowly as he squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked once, and the nearest infected dropped. He worked the bolt, aimed again, fired. Another fell. I watched in amazement as he methodically took down all 5 infected, each shot precise and controlled. No wasted bullets, no panic. After the last one fell, he lowered the rifle and placed it between his seat and the door. "My daddy taught me to shoot when I was 8, he said, as if that explained everything. Then he put the truck in drive and pulled back onto the highway. As we accelerated away from the bodies, I looked back through the rear window. The highway behind us was dark and empty again, as if nothing had happened at all. The sun crept over the horizon as David's truck wound through the back roads of Morris County. Pink and orange streaks painted the sky, a beautiful contrast to the horrors we'd witnessed during the night. My eyelids felt like sandpaper from exhaustion, but sleep wasn't an option. Not when Sarah and Emma might be in danger. David turned onto a gravel road that cut through a dense stretch of trees. After about half a mile, the forest opened to reveal a modest single-story house surrounded by an 8-foot chain-link fence. The property wasn't large, maybe 2 acres total, but what caught my attention was how organized everything looked. Solar panels covered most of the south-facing roof. A large garden took up the backyard with neat rows of vegetables already sprouting. A shed stood off to one side, and I noticed security cameras mounted at each corner of the fence. "Home sweet home," David said as he pulled up to a metal gate and cut the engine. He leaned out the window to enter a code on a keypad. The gate slid open with a mechanical hum. Alice stirred beside me, having dozed off for the last 20 minutes of our drive. She blinked and sat up straighter, taking in our surroundings. David drove through the gate and parked next to a second truck, older than the one we'd been riding in, but well-maintained. He pressed a button on a remote clipped to his visor, and the gate closed behind us. Inside the house, the layout was simple but practical. The front door opened directly into a living room furnished with a worn leather couch, 2 recliners, and a TV that looked at least 10 years old. A wood-burning stove sat in one corner. What stood out wasn't the furniture, but the modifications David had made. Reinforced window frames, extra locks on the doors, and what looked like a water filtration system connected to the kitchen sink. Bathroom's down the hall if you need it," David said, hanging his jacket on a hook by the door. "Then I'll show you what I've got." Alice took him up on the offer while I paced the living room, checking my phone every few seconds, even though I knew it wouldn't suddenly have service. When David led us to his basement, I understood why he'd seemed so calm about the whole situation. The basement was essentially a bunker. Steel shelves lined the walls, stacked with cases of water bottles, canned goods, dried foods, and medical supplies. One section held toiletries, another cleaning products and tools. A gun safe stood open, revealing an arsenal of firearms, rifles, shotguns, and handguns, all legally owned according to David, who noticed my expression. "Been preparing for years," he explained, gesturing around the room. "Figured it would be economic collapse, though, not the dead getting up and walking." "This is..." Alice trailed off, looking at the shelves of supplies. "Paranoid?" David suggested with a slight smile. "That's what my brother called it." I thought about the scenes we'd witnessed in Manhattan. Looks pretty smart from where I'm standing. David nodded toward a desk in the corner where a ham radio sat among various electronic equipment. "That's our best shot at information now. Cell networks are down. Internet too, probably. But radio waves still travel." Alice pointed to an old-fashioned landline phone on the wall. "Can I try calling my parents? They're in Boston." "You can try," David said, "but landlines started going down a few hours ago. I couldn't get through to my cousin in Pennsylvania earlier." While Alice tried the phone, I watched her face fall as she listened to the dead tone. She hung up and tried again with the same result. Without a word, I took the receiver from her when she finished and dialed my home number. Nothing. Then, Sarah's cell. The same emptiness greeted me. "They could be fine," Alice said quietly. "The lines are probably just overwhelmed." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Sarah was smart and resourceful. She would have gotten herself and Emma somewhere safe if the infection reached our town. But doubt gnawed at me like a physical pain. David turned on his ham radio and began adjusting dials. Static filled the room, occasionally broken by fragments of voices. He worked methodically, fine-tuning frequencies until words became clearer. "No, Philadelphia is lost. Repeat, Philadelphia is lost. Military withdrawing to establish perimeter at Valley Forge. Reports from Boston North Shore completely overrun. Survivors heading to Cape Cod. Washington, D.C. under martial law. All civilians instructed to report to designated safe zones for evacuation." Each transmission painted a bleaker picture than the last. This wasn't just Manhattan or even the tri-state area. This was everywhere. "How fast can this spread?" Alice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David turned down the volume on a particularly distressed transmission. "It's not just spreading person to person. People are turning without being bitten." "That doesn't make sense," I said. "Nothing about this makes sense," David replied. "But I've heard 3 separate reports of people just dropping dead, then getting back up again. Something's in the air, maybe. Or the water." I thought about Sarah and Emma again, my heart racing. "I need to get home," David nodded. "First, you both need rest and training." He glanced at the gun safe. "World's different now. You need to know how to protect yourselves." We slept in shifts that first day. David insisted that someone stay awake at all times. I took the first watch, sitting by the living room window with a rifle across my lap. David had given me a basic lesson in loading and firing it, but my hands still felt awkward around the weapon. Through the window, I could see nothing but empty fields and the distant tree line. No movement, no people, infected or otherwise. When it was my turn to sleep, I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, too wired to close my eyes despite my exhaustion. Every time I tried, images of Manhattan flooded back, Hammond being pulled apart, blood spraying across white tile, the vacant eyes of the infected as they stumbled after us. And worse than those memories were the fears. Sarah and Emma alone in our house, the phone ringing with no one to answer it, the infected breaking through our flimsy suburban doors and windows. I must have drifted off eventually, because Alice was shaking me awake as afternoon sun slanted through the blinds. "David's going to teach us to shoot," she said. "He says we should practice while there's still daylight." The backyard had been set up with makeshift targets, cans and bottles arranged on fence posts about 50 yards out. David handed each of us earplugs and safety glasses. "First rule," he said, "every gun is loaded, even when it isn't. Second rule, never point at anything you don't intend to destroy." He demonstrated proper stance and grip, then attached what he called a suppressor to a pistol. "These won't make it silent like in the movies, but they'll muffle the sound enough that we won't attract every walker for miles." Walker, that's what David called them, not infected or zombies. Walkers. He handed the pistol to Alice first. To my surprise, she took it with far less hesitation than I felt. She followed his instructions, feet shoulder-width apart, both hands on the grip. When she fired, the bottle at the end of the row shattered. David raised his eyebrows. "Not bad." Alice lowered the gun, a small smile forming. "My dad took me to a range once. I hated it then." When my turn came, I missed the first 3 shots before finally clipping a can on the 4th try. The gun felt unnatural in my hands, the responsibility of holding something that could so easily kill weighing on me. But I kept practicing, knowing I might need this skill to protect my family. Over the next 2 days, we fell into a routine. Mornings were spent checking the perimeter and listening to the radio. Afternoons were for target practice. Evenings we spent planning routes on maps spread across David's kitchen table, marking reported outbreak areas and possible safe zones. The news from the radio grew worse. Major cities on the East Coast had fallen. The military was trying to establish quarantine zones, but they were being overrun faster than they could be set up. Government broadcasts became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Alice improved rapidly with the firearms, outpacing me in both accuracy and comfort. She didn't talk much about her family in Boston, but I caught her staring at the silent phone more than once. My own attempts to reach home continued hourly at first, then every few hours as hope dwindled. Each silent call amplified my anxiety until it became a physical ache in my chest. By the morning of the third day, I couldn't wait any longer. "I need to leave today," I told David over breakfast. Powdered eggs and instant coffee, which tasted like luxury given the circumstances. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Figured you would." He took a long sip of coffee. "The old truck out front has a full tank. It's not as good as this one, but it'll get you where you need to go." "We can't take your truck," Alice protested. "You can and you will," David replied firmly. "I'm staying put. This place is secure. I have supplies and someone needs to keep monitoring the radio. Besides, I've got my ATV if I need to move around." After breakfast, we loaded the truck with supplies: water, food, medical kits, ammunition, and 2 rifles, plus the pistol Alice had been practicing with. David included a detailed map with routes marked in red pen, avoiding major highways and cities. "You stick to these back roads," he advised, tracing the lines with his finger. "Might take longer, but you'll avoid the worst congestion and the bigger herds of walkers." As I closed the tailgate, I felt a wave of gratitude for this man who'd been a stranger 3 days ago. "Thank you for everything," David shrugged. "World's gone to hell. Gotta help each other now, or there's no point in surviving." Alice climbed into the passenger seat, the rifle David had given her held securely across her lap. I walked around to the driver's side, then turned back to David, who stood by the gate. If we find somewhere safe," I said, "we'll come back for you." He nodded once. "I'll keep the light on." He entered the code to open the gate, then stepped back as I started the engine. As we pulled out onto the gravel road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. David stood watching us leave, a solitary figure framed by his fence and house, the last piece of normalcy we might see for a long time. I turned my attention to the road ahead. Somewhere out there, Sarah and Emma were waiting. I had to believe that. The alternative was unthinkable. I gripped the steering wheel of David's old truck as we crossed into Pennsylvania, the road stretching empty before us. Alice sat beside me, the map spread across her lap, rifle balanced against her thigh. The morning sun made long shadows across the pavement as we passed abandoned cars and occasional wandering figures that turned toward us at the sound of the engine. "Take the next right," Alice said, tracing our route with her finger. "It should keep us off the main highways." I followed her directions, turning onto a narrow county road that wound through dense forest. David had marked these back routes in red pen, a lifeline through what had become dangerous territory. My hands ached from gripping the wheel so tightly, but I couldn't make myself relax, not when we were so close. "How much farther?" I asked, though I knew the answer. These were my roads now, the familiar path home. "About 40 miles, Alice replied, folding the map. "Should take us less than an hour if the roads stay clear." The small towns we passed through looked like movie sets after the cameras stopped rolling. Baxtertown had its tidy main street with colonial-style buildings, but no movement except a single walker stumbling out of the pharmacy as we drove by. In Millbrook, American flags still hung from lampposts, waving gently in the breeze while 3 infected shuffled between abandoned cars. "It happened so fast," Alice murmured, looking out the window as we passed through another empty town square. "How does the world end in just 3 days?" I had no answer for her. My mind was fixed on one thing only: Sarah and Emma. Every minute that passed without knowing if they were alive felt like drowning, a pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. We drove in silence after that, both lost in our own thoughts. The forests gave way to scattered houses, then more densely packed neighborhoods as we approached Stroudsburg. I took a back entrance into town, avoiding the main streets where cars sat abandoned at odd angles. "We're close," I said, turning onto Hillcrest Road. 2 more turns." Alice checked the pistol David had given her, making sure it was loaded. The rifle lay across her lap, ready if needed. I'd never been so grateful for someone's presence as I was for hers in that moment. When we turned onto Maple Drive, my heart skipped. The street looked untouched: green lawns, intact houses, even a bicycle left on someone's front walk. If not for the absence of people and the unnatural quiet, it might have been any normal day. My house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, a two-story colonial with blue shutters that Sarah had painted herself last summer. The front door stood slightly open. I stopped the truck in the driveway and cut the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy, broken only by birdsong from the woods behind our property. "I'm going in first," I said, reaching for the handgun tucked into my waistband. David had given us both crash courses in handling firearms, though Alice had taken to it more naturally than me. Alice nodded. "I'll watch the street. Be careful." I climbed out of the truck, gun held awkwardly at my side. The front walk seemed a mile long. Each step toward that open door sent my pulse racing faster. "Sarah!" I called out before even reaching the porch. "Emma?" No response, just the creak of the door as the wind pushed it wider. I stepped over the threshold into our living room. Everything looked normal. Couch pillows arranged as Sarah liked them, Emma's school artwork hanging on the walls, even the remote control sitting on the coffee table where I'd left it Friday morning before heading to work. "Sarah! Emma! It's me, Ryan!" The house answered with silence. I moved toward the kitchen, gun raised now despite my discomfort with the weapon. The moment I stepped through the doorway, I knew something had happened here. One of the kitchen chairs lay on its side. Another was pushed against the wall. Broken dishes scattered across the floor near the sink, and a dark stain spread across the edge of our white tile. "No, no, no," I whispered, moving deeper into the kitchen. That's when I saw Buddy. Our golden retriever lay crumpled near the basement door, his fur matted with dried blood. His eyes stared sightlessly toward the ceiling, his muzzle frozen in a final snarl of defense. My knees buckled. The gun nearly slipped from my hand as I reached out to touch his cold fur. Buddy had been with us since before Emma was born. He slept at the foot of her bed every night. "Ryan," Alice's voice came from behind me, gentle but urgent. She'd followed me, and despite saying she'd watch the street. Her hand gripped my shoulder, steadying me. "We need to keep looking. Your family might still be here." I nodded, forcing myself to stand. The basement door was closed, but not latched completely. A smear of what looked like blood marked the white paint near the handle. "Sarah?" I called again, my voice breaking. "Emma?" A sound came from below, a soft thump, then silence. I pulled the basement door open slowly, pointing the gun into the darkness. The stairs descended into shadow, the light switch not working when I flipped it. "It's me," I called down, softer this time. "It's Ryan." Another sound, a whimper maybe, or a whispered word I couldn't make out. I started down the stairs carefully, each wooden step creaking under my weight. Alice stayed at the top, her silhouette framed in the doorway, keeping watch both ways. Our basement was finished, with a small family room on one end and a storage area on the other. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the small ground-level windows, I could make out shapes of furniture stacked against the far wall of the storage section, chairs piled on top of boxes, a bookshelf pushed in front of it all. "Sarah?" I whispered, lowering the gun slightly. A movement behind the barrier. Then, so quiet, I almost missed it. "Ryan?" My heart lurched. "Sarah, it's me. I'm here." The sound of furniture scraping across concrete. A chair toppled over from the pile. Then Sarah emerged from behind the makeshift barricade, her blonde hair tangled, face streaked with dirt and tears. Behind her, small fingers clutched at her shirt. Emma. I tucked the gun into my waistband and rushed forward, gathering them both into my arms so tightly I could feel their hearts beating against my chest. Sarah sobbed against my neck, while Emma clung to me in silence, her small body trembling. "I thought you were dead," Sarah choked out between sobs. "The phones weren't working. The news said Manhattan was gone." I held them tighter, my own tears flowing freely now. "I'm here. I'm okay. You're both okay." For a long moment, we just held each other in the dim basement light. I couldn't believe they were alive. After everything I'd seen, all the death and destruction, finding them felt impossible. A miracle I didn't deserve, but would never stop being grateful for. When Sarah finally pulled back enough to look at my face, I saw the exhaustion etched in the dark circles under her eyes, the fear still lingering in her expression. "What happened here?" I asked. Sarah glanced toward the stairs, then back at me. "They came 2 days ago, 3 of them. Buddy," her voice broke. "Buddy tried to fight them off while we ran. I got Emma into the basement and blocked the door, but I could hear. She shook her head, unable to finish. Emma hadn't spoken a word. She stayed pressed against me, face hidden against my chest. When I stroked her hair, I felt how matted and dirty it was. "How long have you been down here?" I asked. "Since it happened," Sarah replied. "The power went out that night. Water stopped yesterday. We have some bottled water and snacks from the emergency kit," but she looked toward the barricade. "I was afraid to go back upstairs. I could hear them sometimes, moving around up there and outside." I kissed her forehead, then Emma's. "You did everything right. You kept our girl safe." Sarah seemed to notice Alice for the first time, standing halfway down the stairs. "Who's that?" she asked, tensing slightly. "A friend," I said. "Alice. She helped me get home to you." Alice nodded a silent greeting, but remained where she was, giving us space for our reunion. "We need to gather whatever's important and leave," I told Sarah quietly. "It's not safe here." She started to ask a question, but Alice's voice cut her off. "Ryan," there was something in her tone that made my skin prickle. "We have a problem." I turned toward the stairs. Alice wasn't looking at us anymore. Her attention was fixed on one of the small basement windows. "What is it?" I asked, though I already knew. A cold weight settled in my stomach. "Movement in the woods," Alice said, her voice controlled but tight. "At least 6 of them that I can see. Coming this way." Sarah's fingers dug into my arm. Emma pressed closer against me, a small whimper escaping her. "How long do we have?" I asked. Alice glanced back at me, her face grim in the half-light. "Minutes. We need to leave immediately." I turned to Sarah, gripping her shoulders firmly. "We need to get to the truck right now. Grab anything important, but we have seconds, not minutes." Sarah nodded, her eyes wide but focused. She kneeled down to Emma's level. "Baby, we have to go with Daddy. Stay right with me, okay?" Emma didn't speak but clutched her mother's hand. Sarah grabbed a small backpack from behind the barricade, their emergency kit, I realized, and slung it over her shoulder. Alice had already moved up the stairs, rifle raised, checking the kitchen. "Clear for now," she called down, "but I can see movement through the back windows." We moved as a unit up the stairs, me leading with my handgun, Sarah and Emma in the middle, Alice bringing up the rear. When we reached the kitchen, I forced myself not to look at Buddy's body. Emma saw him, though. Her small gasp cut through me worse than any scream could have. "Keep going," I urged, guiding them toward the front door. The living room remained undisturbed, a snapshot of our life from before. Family photos on the mantel, Emma's soccer trophy on the bookshelf, the blanket Sarah had knitted last winter draped over the couch. We'd never sit in this room again. I peered through the front window. The cul-de-sac still appeared empty, but movement at the edge of the woods made my stomach clench. Dark figures stumbled between the trees, headed our way. "Truck's in the driveway," I said. "We run straight for it. Sarah, you and Emma get in the back seat. I'll drive. Alice will cover us." Alice positioned herself by the door, her stance confident with the rifle. I remembered how awkward I'd felt holding a gun just days ago. Now it felt necessary, like an extension of my arm. "Ready?" I asked, looking at each of them. Sarah nodded, clutching Emma against her side. The little girl's face remained blank, her eyes unfocused. "Go," I said, pulling the door open. We moved down the front walk in a tight group. The truck sat 20 feet away, sunlight glinting off its windshield, too bright, too exposed. Alice stepped sideways, keeping pace with us while scanning the perimeter. Just as we reached the truck, she stopped and raised her rifle in one fluid motion. "Ryan!" she called. I turned to see 3 infected burst from the tree line at the edge of our property. They moved with that horrible jerky gait, faces twisted in permanent hunger. One wore the remains of a postal worker's uniform, another, a jogging outfit now caked with dried blood. Alice fired 3 times in rapid succession. Each shot found its mark, dropping the infected one after another. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood like thunder. "Get in!" I shouted, yanking the truck's back door open. Sarah practically threw Emma inside before climbing in after her. I rushed to the driver's side, while Alice kept her rifle trained on the woods, backing toward the passenger door. More movement caught my eye, this time from between houses. Our neighbors' yards, once sites of summer barbecues and children's birthday parties, now funneled the dead toward us. I counted at least 7 more infected emerging from behind the Petersons' hedge, another 4 from the direction of the Richardsons' pool. "Alice!" I yelled as I jumped into the driver's seat. She fired twice more, then scrambled into the passenger seat, pulling the door shut just as I started the engine. The truck roared to life, its old engine rattling under the hood. I threw it into reverse, tires spinning on the pavement before catching. We shot backward down the driveway as the first of the new wave of infected reached for the bumper, fingers scraping uselessly against metal. Cranking the wheel, I switched to drive and stomped on the gas. The truck lurched forward, sideswiping our mailbox and sending it spinning across the lawn. In the rearview mirror, I watched as dozens more infected poured from the surrounding woods and houses, drawn by the gunshots. "They're everywhere," Sarah whispered from the back seat, her arms wrapped protectively around Emma. I gunned the engine, speeding down Maple Drive toward the main road. Houses flashed by on either side, some with doors standing open, others with windows broken, all empty of anything living. Alice kept her rifle ready, watching our flanks as I navigated through abandoned cars. The infected grew smaller in the mirrors until they disappeared from view entirely, though I knew they would continue in our direction, following the sound of the truck until something else caught their attention. Once we hit Liberty Road, Sarah asked the question I knew was coming. "Where are we going?" I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale but composed, her body curved around Emma like a shield. "There's a place," I said. "A compound about 2 hours from here. It belongs to a man named David Turner. He helped us get here." Alice turned in her seat. "He has supplies, security. It's the safest place we've found." Sarah nodded slowly, processing. "Is there anyone else there?" "Just David," I said. "At least for now." We drove in silence for several minutes, all of us watching the landscape pass by. Stroudsburg looked abandoned but not destroyed. Cars sat empty along the roads. Storefronts remained intact, though many doors stood ajar. A grocery store parking lot was littered with shopping carts and personal belongings. Purses, shoes, a child's stuffed animal lying face down on the asphalt. Alice unfolded the map as we approached the highway. "We should stick to these back roads," she said, tracing a route with her finger. David marked the roads that were still clear when he came through. I followed her directions, turning onto a narrow county road that would take us away from population centers. The truck bounced over uneven pavement as we crossed a small bridge, the creek below running clear and undisturbed. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked quietly after we'd been driving for almost an hour. Emma had fallen asleep against her, exhaustion finally overwhelming the little girl's fear. I exchanged a look with Alice, uncertain how much to say with Emma present, even sleeping. It's everywhere," I finally answered, keeping my voice low. "Manhattan was overrun when we left. Philadelphia too, from what we heard on the radio. The military tried to establish quarantine zones, but..." I trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. Sarah stroked Emma's hair, her gaze fixed on our daughter's face. "What happened to you after Manhattan?" she asked. "How did you find this David person?" So I told her everything, escaping O'Malley's through the bathroom window, driving through the chaos of the city, meeting David on the highway after our car broke down. I told her about the 3 days at his compound, learning to shoot, monitoring the radio reports as the world collapsed around us. Sarah listened without interrupting, her eyes on the passing landscape. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Everything's gone, isn't it?" she finally said. "Our jobs, Emma's school, everything we planned for." I couldn't lie to her. "Yes, but we're still here. We're together. That's what matters now." The afternoon sun hung low in the sky by the time we turned onto the gravel road leading to David's property. The trees seemed to close in around us, branches creating a tunnel of green and shadow. After nearly half a mile, the forest opened up to reveal the fence surrounding David's modest house. As we approached the gate, I noticed movement on the roof. David stood there, binoculars raised, scanning the road behind us. He lowered them when he recognized the truck, then disappeared from view. Alice leaned out the window to enter the code on the keypad. The gate hummed to life, sliding open just enough for us to drive through before closing again. David met us in the yard, a rifle slung over his shoulder. His eyes moved from face to face, lingering briefly on Sarah and Emma in the back seat. "Doth anyone follow you?" he asked as I cut the engine. "Don't think so," I replied. "We took your route, avoided the main roads." He nodded, then walked a complete circle around the truck, examining it for damage. Finding none, he approached Sarah's door and opened it with a gentle courtesy that seemed at odds with his gruff appearance. "Ma'am," he said, offering his hand. "David Turner." Sarah took it, her other arm still wrapped around Emma. "Sarah Mitchell, this is our daughter Emma." David's expression softened at the sight of the little girl, still sleeping despite our arrival. "Let's get you folks inside," he said. "Sun's going down soon." We unloaded the few supplies we'd brought: Sarah's emergency backpack, the weapons David had given us, a small bag of personal items I'd grabbed from our bedroom on the way out. The house felt smaller with 5 people inside, but somehow safer than it had before. Emma woke as we entered, her eyes wide and fearful until she located Sarah and me. She clung to her mother, refusing to let go even when offered food. "She hasn't spoken since it happened," Sarah explained quietly as David heated canned soup on his propane stove. "Not a word for 2 days." Alice sat beside Emma on the couch, not crowding her but close enough to offer comfort. "That's okay," she said. "You talk when you're ready, Emma. No rush." After we ate, David led us to the basement to show Sarah and Emma the supplies he'd accumulated. Sarah walked the rows of shelves silently, running her fingers over canned goods and medical supplies. "You've been preparing for this for a long time," she observed. David shrugged. "Not for the dead walking specifically, but for something. World's been headed toward a cliff for years." That evening, we gathered around David's kitchen table with cups of instant coffee. Emma had finally fallen asleep again, on the couch, wrapped in a blanket Alice had found in a closet. The radio sat in the center of the table, occasional bursts of static breaking through as David fine-tuned the frequencies. "Nothing from the government channel since yesterday," he reported. "Last transmission said the CDC headquarters in Atlanta was overrun. After that, silence." "What about military broadcasts?" Alice asked. David shook his head. "Fragmented reports, units separated, command structures broken. Some talk about a fallback position in the Midwest, but nothing concrete." Sarah wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, staring into the dark liquid. "So what do we do now? Where do we go?" "Go?" David repeated. "Ma'am, Sarah, there's nowhere to go. Every major city east of the Mississippi is lost from what I can gather. Smaller towns are following suit." "So we just stay here?" I asked. David leaned back in his chair, considering. "This place is secure for now. 8-foot fence, good sightlines, solar power, well water. But it's small for 5 people long term." He paused, looking at each of us in turn. "We could expand it though, reinforce the fence, maybe extend it to include more of the surrounding land, build something sustainable." "Like a permanent settlement," Alice said. David nodded. "The garden already produces enough vegetables for 1 person. We could triple its size, add fruit trees. The solar setup can be expanded. There's game in these woods, enough to hunt without drawing attention." Sarah straightened in her chair. "Emma needs stability, a safe place." She looked at me, then back to David. "If you're willing to have us, we'll help build whatever needs building." "It won't be easy," David warned. "Winter's coming in a few months. We'll need firewood, more food stored up. And there's always the risk of other people finding this place, living people, maybe desperate ones." "We'll face that when it happens," I said. The conversation continued late into the night, plans taking shape around practical needs: security, food, water, shelter. David sketched a rough map of his property, marking areas where the fence could be extended, where additional structures might be built. Sarah participated actively, her initial shock giving way to the practical problem-solving I'd always admired in her. She suggested ways to collect rainwater, asked about medicinal plants that could be grown, wondered if solar panels could be salvaged from nearby houses. As the discussion wound down, Alice caught my eye across the table and gave a small, determined nod. The gesture said everything words couldn't. We were in this together now, all of us, a team, maybe even a family of sorts, forged in the collapse of the world we'd known. Outside, darkness had fully settled over the trees. Through the kitchen window, I could see stars scattered across the night sky, brighter than they'd ever been in our light-polluted world before. Everything had changed, but we were still here, still breathing, still fighting. Sarah reached for my hand under the table, her fingers interlacing with mine. I squeezed gently, feeling the strength in her grip. Whatever came next, we would face it together.